David! Run! Get out of the way! It's gonna swallow us!
Got him! Go! Go!
You need to stop this inspection immediately, Mr. Torres. You're trespassing on HOA property. Patricia Morgan's voice cut through the March drizzle like a knife. She stood at the edge of the construction site, arms crossed over a pristine white blazer, blocking my path to the half-built reservoir wall that loomed behind her like a concrete tombstone. I looked up from the mud-caked soil sample in my hands. My gloves were soaked, my field notebook was dissolving in the rain, and my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This isn't HOA property, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. This is conservation easement. And that wall? It's going to fail. Her smile could have frozen the rain. I have an engineering report that says otherwise, from a licensed professional. Unless you think 15 years with the U.S. Geological Survey. I stood slowly, mud dripping from my boots. Our eyes met, studying slope failures in these exact mountains. So yes, Patricia, I know more than your brother-in-law's rubber stamp report. The color drained from her face. For one heartbeat, I saw beneath the mask raw, genuine terror. She knew. On some level, she knew. Then it was gone. Professional smile back in place. You'll be hearing from our attorneys. She turned and walked back to her Mercedes, heels sinking slightly in the mud with each step. I watched her go, hands trembling, and remembered the last time I'd seen that expression. Guatemala, 2019. A government official's face when I showed him calculations proving his brother's dam was built on unstable ground. 2 weeks later, 43 people drowned when it collapsed during a rainstorm. I'd sworn never again. But standing there in the cold rain, watching Patricia's taillights disappear down the mountain road, I felt that same sick certainty settling into my bones. History was about to repeat itself. Unless I could stop it. The sound woke me 3 weeks earlier. Not thunder, though. My half-asleep brain tried to convince me that's what I was hearing. But my knees told a different story. After 15 years doing field work in the Appalachians, my joints had become a better weather forecast than any app. No rain coming. So what was that low, mechanical growl rolling down from Timber Ridge? I stood on my back porch at 5:47 a.m., coffee mug warming my hands, listening to the darkness. Rhythmic, industrial, the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. Luna pressed against my leg, whining. My 10-year-old border collie had never been afraid of storms, but something about this sound made her hackles rise. I know, girl, I murmured, scratching behind her ears. I don't like it either. By the time sunrise painted the ridge orange and gold, I was on my ATV, climbing the narrow trail I'd carved 5 years ago for erosion monitoring. The mechanical sounds grew louder with every switchback. Hydraulic hisses, beeping of trucks in reverse, metal clanging against metal. Then I crested the ridge and my breath caught. A massive excavation had been gouged into the mountainside like a wound. Concrete forms scattered across the clearing, a dozen workers in reflective vests, moving with the urgent efficiency of a crew racing a deadline. And at the center of it all, a bulldozer tearing into reddish-brown clay that gleamed wet in the morning light. Piedmont residual clay. I'd know that color anywhere. My hands tightened on the handlebars until my knuckles went white. They were building a reservoir, on 30% grade, on clay that turned to something close to liquid when saturated, directly above 200 homes, including the elementary school where Mrs. Chin's kids went every day. I should have turned around, should have gone straight to county officials. Let bureaucracy do its slow, grinding work. Instead, I gunned the ATV and rode straight down to the construction site. Wrong choice number 1. The foreman saw me coming. Big guy, reflective vest, clipboard, the kind of expression that said he'd dealt with nosy neighbors before and wasn't impressed. Help you? His tone said the opposite. I killed the engine. Who authorized this construction? HOA board. Full approval. You got a problem? Take it up with Summit Ridge Management. This is protected watershed, I said, pulling out my phone. starting to take photos. You can't build here without environmental permits, geotechnical studies. We got all that. He tapped his clipboard. Engineers signed off. Everything's by the book. What? Engineer? He checked his paperwork. Morgan Engineering Solutions. Licensed in North Carolina, fully bonded. He looked up at me with poorly concealed irritation. Now, unless you're with the county, you need to clear out. This is a construction zone. Morgan Engineering. Patricia Morgan's maiden name was Morgan. Her brother-in-law ran an engineering firm. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. When that wall fails, I said quietly, and it will fail, people are going to die. You understand that? The foreman's expression shifted from annoyed to hostile. Who the hell are you? David Torres. I own the farm at the base of this slope, and I spent 15 years studying exactly this kind of failure for the USGS. Well, Mr. Torres, I've been building things for 20 years, and I ain't never seen nothing fail that was built to code. He stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. Now, get off this site before I call the sheriff. I wanted to argue, wanted to explain about clay expansion, poor water pressure, the documented history of slope failures in this exact geological formation, but I could see in his eyes he didn't care. He had a job to finish, a bonus to earn, a deadline to meet, so I left. But I took 63 photos on the way down. Back home, I tried every official channel I could think of, called the HOA office voicemail. County Planning Department, they'd get back to me in 5 business days. State Environmental Agency, please fill out Form 447B and submit with supporting documentation. Every path required patience, paperwork, and time we didn't have. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at those photos on my laptop, seeing not just construction, but catastrophe in slow motion. The exposed clay. The hairline cracks already forming from excavation vibration. The natural drainage channel they'd cut straight through. Luna whined from her bed, sensing my distress. It's okay, girl. I lied. But it wasn't okay. Because I'd seen this before. Guatemala. A dam built fast and cheap on unstable ground. Government officials ignoring warnings because acknowledging them meant admitting mistakes, meant delays, meant someone's brother-in-law losing a contract. I documented the aftermath. Photographed 43 bodies pulled from the mud. Written a report that was filed away and forgotten. And here I was again, watching the same disaster assemble itself like clockwork. And once again, no one wanted to listen. Maybe I was wrong this time. Maybe they did have proper engineering. Maybe I was just being paranoid, seeing ghosts of Guatemala in every construction site. Wrong thought number 2. Doubting your expertise when you shouldn't. The next morning, I drove to the county planning office. Helen, the clerk who'd worked there probably 30 years, searched her database while I waited, drumming my fingers on the counter harder than I meant to. Summit Ridge HOA Reservoir, she muttered, typing with 2 careful fingers. Let's see. No watershed permits filed. No geotechnical assessment. No contractor bonds registered. She looked up at me, tired eyes now alert with concern. You sure they're building something up there? I showed her the photos on my phone. Her expression went from skeptical to alarmed in the space of 3 images. That's, Mr. Torres, if they're doing earthwork at that scale without permits, I need to send an inspector. But, she checked her calendar. Earliest we can get someone out there is end of next week. We're short-staffed right now. 9 days. In 9 days, they could pour the entire foundation, install the retention system, maybe even start filling it. Can't you do an emergency inspection? I'd need supervisor approval for that. He's at a conference in Charlotte until Friday. I left with a complaint, form, and dread, sitting heavy in my stomach. That afternoon, I did what I should have done first. I pulled out my old USGS topographic maps, soil surveys from 2015, rainfall data going back 40 years, spread them across my dining room table like battlefield plans. Then I started calculating slope angles, drainage patterns, estimated load capacities for that specific soil type under saturation. 6 hours later, I sat back, rubbing my eyes, wishing the numbers told a different story. They didn't. Every calculation, every model, every comparison to documented failures pointed to the same conclusion. That site was fundamentally unsuitable for water retention. The geology weathered schist over impermeable clay meant water weight would create pore pressure that could liquefy the entire slope. I drafted a formal letter, cited specific geological concerns, attached my analysis, my credentials, my calculations, sent copies to the HOA, the county, the state environmental agency, and every board member email I could find. 3 days later, I got a response. Not from officials, not from engineers. From Patricia Morgan, a violation notice. My satellite dish installed 4 years ago with HOA approval was now non-compliant due to updated aesthetic standards. Fine, $150. Plus $25 per day until corrected. I stood in my driveway in the rain, reading it, and actually laughed. Then I read it again, and the laugh died in my throat. They weren't just dismissing my concerns, they were trying to intimidate me into silence. Classic HOA playbook. Can't argue the facts, attack the messenger. That same week, Luna stopped going near the south pasture. She'd walk up to the fence line, whine, turn back. No amount of coaxing would get her past that invisible boundary. Animals know. They sense things we've forgotten how to feel. I also started finding hairline cracks in the soil, thin fractures that hadn't been there a week ago, spreading like spider webs through my lower field. I measured them with calipers, marked them with wooden stakes, photographed them from multiple angles. The cracks were growing. I needed expert verification, someone whose credentials couldn't be dismissed as paranoid neighbor with an agenda. I called Dr. Sarah Kim. We'd worked together years ago on a USGS slope stability study in the Smokies. She was teaching at NC State now, but still did consulting work. David Torres, she said when she answered, warmth in her voice, despite 3 years of silence. This better not be you asking me to peer review another research paper at midnight. I need you to look at a site, I said. Unofficial. Someone's building a reservoir on unstable slope. I think it's going to fail. Long pause. Then, text me the coordinates. She arrived 2 days later in a mud-splattered pickup, her truck bed loaded with equipment I recognized. Hand auger, inclinometer, moisture probe, all the tools we'd used, documenting landslide hazards. I walked her up to the ridge without talking much. She didn't need my commentary, she needed to see it herself. She spent an hour measuring, probing, calculating, knelt by the excavation cuts, examining the exposed soil profile, like a doctor reading fatal x-rays. Finally, she stood up, brushing clay from her hands. David. Her voice was quiet. Too quiet. This is textbook unstable. Piedmont residual clay over weathered rock. You know what that means. Low cohesion when saturated, I said. Rapid strength loss under load. She nodded. That reservoir wall is going to act like a giant weight pressing on soil that's basically lubricated clay after it rains. And I see zero, absolutely zero proper drainage infrastructure. She pulled out her phone, checked the satellite view. How many homes downslope? 200, give or take, plus the elementary school. Jesus. She was quiet for a moment. How much rain do you get in April? 3 to 5 inches, average. Sometimes more. Then you've got maybe 6 weeks. If they fill that reservoir before proper drainage is installed, this entire slope could mobilize. We stood there in silence, looking down at Summit Ridge. Neat rows of houses, kids playing in yards, completely unaware of the geological time bomb being assembled above their heads. I need you to write a report, I said. Official. Something they can't ignore. She did. 3 single-spaced pages of technical analysis. Soil classifications, slope stability calculations, specific recommendations. Her conclusion was professionally understated but damning. Construction should cease immediately, pending comprehensive geotechnical investigation. I submitted it to the county with my third formal complaint. Also sent copies to the HOA board, the local newspaper, and every official email I could find. The response came fast. Not from officials, from Patricia Morgan's attorney. The letter arrived via certified mail. 7 pages of legal threats in polite language, defamation, interference with legitimate business operations, harassment of contractors. The final paragraph demanded I cease all unauthorized monitoring, reporting, and communication regarding HOA construction projects or face immediate legal action and fines up to $10,000. I stood on my porch reading it, rain drumming on the metal roof, my hand shaking with something beyond anger, frustration, helplessness. The grinding weight of knowing what was coming and being powerless to stop it. For one moment, I almost gave up, almost decided to protect myself, my property, my peace of mind. Let someone else fight this battle. Then I remembered Guatemala, the mother whose children I'd helped pull from the mud. The way she'd looked at me when I told her I'd warned officials weeks before the dam broke. Why didn't they listen? She'd asked through tears. I hadn't had an answer then. I didn't have one now. But I could make them listen this time. Or at least make enough noise that when the mountain spoke, people would know I'd tried to warn them. I made a choice. Maybe the only right one I had left. I decided to go public. That night, I compiled everything. Photos, soil reports, Sarah's analysis, the threatening letters, the retaliatory violations. Put it all in a folder labeled Summit Ridge Reservoir, a disaster in progress. Then, I sent it to Marcus Reed, an investigative journalist with the Asheville Citizen-Times who'd written extensively about environmental failures in western North Carolina. Up on the ridge, construction lights blazed until 2 a.m. They were working overtime now, racing against scrutiny, trying to finish before anyone could stop them. I watched from my porch with binoculars, documenting everything, and wondered if I'd just saved lives or painted a target on my back. By morning, the first news crew had arrived, and Patricia Morgan was about to discover that silencing whistleblowers only works when they stay silent. The article hit on Thursday morning. Not front page, page 3 of the local section, but with my photo of the excavation site prominently displayed. Questions raised about Summit Ridge Reservoir project. Marcus Reed had done his homework. Contacted independent experts, verified Sarah Kim's credentials and conclusions. Most damaging, confirmed that 0 permits had been filed with the county. Summit Ridge HOA declined to comment. The article stated, HOA President Patricia Morgan did not respond to multiple requests for interview. My phone started ringing at 7:43 a.m. First call, an angry board member accusing me of media grandstanding. Second call, a neighbor I barely knew thanking me for speaking up. Third call, a blocked number that turned out to be Patricia Morgan herself. You've crossed a line, Mr. Torres. Her voice was tight, barely controlled. This kind of public smear campaign is exactly what our attorneys warned you about. I warned you about unstable geology, I said. You responded with lawyer letters. So, I warned everyone else. You're going to regret this. I regret that 200 families are living below an unsound structure built by your brother-in-law's firm without proper oversight. But if warning them is what gets me sued, I'll take that risk. She hung up without another word. That afternoon, Summit Ridge called an emergency board meeting, residents only, which technically included me, though I doubted they wanted me there. I went anyway. James Webb caught me in the parking lot. He was a board member I'd met exactly once at a neighborhood barbecue, quiet guy. Retired accountant, seemed decent. They're voting to censure you, he said quietly. Thought you should know. Thanks. How are you voting? He met my eyes. Against censure. Someone needs to ask these questions. One person, out of 7 board members, one person with a conscience. The meeting room was packed. 60, maybe 70 residents crammed into a space designed for 30. The air was thick with anxiety and anger in roughly equal measure. Patricia sat at the head table with 6 other board members, her posture rigid, her face carefully neutral. She didn't look at me when I walked in, but I felt her awareness like static electricity. The meeting started with standard business approving minutes, reviewing finances. Patricia moved through the agenda with mechanical efficiency, clearly wanting to get past public comment as quickly as possible. But when she finally opened the floor, 12 hands shot up immediately. The first few speakers supported me. Why weren't we told about this project? Who authorized construction without permits? Is my family safe? Then came Patricia's defenders. Mr. Torres is causing unnecessary panic. He's not even a licensed engineer in North Carolina. I was, but the implication stung. This is just revenge for violation notices. When my turn came, I walked to the microphone with my laptop and a folder of documentation. My hands were steadier than I expected, maybe because I'd done this before. Guatemala. Presenting evidence to officials who didn't want to hear it? At least this time there were cameras. My name is David Torres. 15 years with the U.S. Geological Survey, specializing in slope stability and catastrophic failures in the Appalachians. I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here because I've seen what happens when reservoir walls fail on unstable slopes, and I don't want to see it happen here. I pulled up photos on my laptop, projected them on the screen behind the board table. This is the construction site 3 weeks ago. Notice the exposed clay, the lack of drainage infrastructure, the absence of proper retention systems. Next photo. This is last week. Hairline cracks forming in the soil downslope. Final photo. This is yesterday. That bulge in the earth? That's the ground beginning to fail. The room went silent. It's not a question of if anymore, I said quietly. It's when. And if you fill that reservoir before the spring rains pass, when becomes now. Patricia's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Mr. Torres, we have engineering reports from licensed professionals certifying this project is safe. Are you suggesting they're all wrong? I'm suggesting their analysis is incomplete. I've reviewed the report from Morgan Engineering. I saw her flinch slightly at the name, and it doesn't account for seasonal rainfall patterns. Doesn't include soil strength testing after saturation, and makes assumptions about drainage capacity that are demonstrably false. Those are serious allegations against she caught herself. Against a licensed firm. Those are facts, I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. And when that wall fails, facts won't matter anymore. What will matter is how many people were in their homes when it happened. How many kids were in the elementary school. The room erupted, people shouting questions, board members trying to respond. Patricia hammering her gavel. In the chaos, I caught James Webb's eye. He gave me a slight nod. Then Patricia did something I didn't expect. She called for an immediate vote, cutting off all further discussion. All in favor of proceeding with reservoir fill operations as scheduled? 4 hands went up. Patricia's and 3 others I knew had construction industry connections. Opposed? 3 hands. James and 2 others who'd been silent all night, but had apparently heard enough. 4-3. They were going to fill it. I sat there, watching democracy fail in real time, feeling something crack inside me. Not anger, something colder. The realization that I'd done everything right, documented, reported, followed every proper channel, and it hadn't mattered. They were going to fill the reservoir, people were going to get hurt, and it would all be perfectly legal. I walked out without saying another word. In the parking lot, Mrs. Chen caught up with me. She taught 2nd grade at the elementary school. Her 8-year-old daughter was in one of those classrooms directly downslope from the reservoir. Mr. Torres. Her voice shook. Should I keep my kids home from school? I looked at her, a mother, terrified, asking me to predict a disaster I knew was coming, but couldn't prove until it arrived. Keep them home tomorrow, I said. The rain starts tonight. If I'm wrong, you waste 1 day. If I'm right, I didn't finish. Didn't need to. She squeezed my arm. Thank you for trying. That night, I didn't even attempt sleep. I sat at my monitoring station laptop, weather radar, real-time data feeds from the instruments I'd placed around the site, watching numbers change with the kind of dread you feel watching a train wreck in slow motion. Rain started at 11:47 p.m. Steady. Heavy. The kind of rain that soaks deep. At 2:17 a.m., one of my inclinometers registered sudden movement. 3 millimeters in less than 10 minutes. That wasn't gradual settling. That was failure initiating. I grabbed my phone, started calling everyone I could think of. Ellen Rodriguez at Emergency Management, James Webb, Marcus Reed, 911. Most went to voicemail. Ellen answered on the 5th ring, her voice thick with sleep. "It's starting," I said. "The slope is moving. You need to evacuate that neighborhood now." "David, I can't order an evacuation based on your personal monitoring equipment. I need official. By the time you get official confirmation, people will be dead." Silence. Then, "I'll call the fire chief. We can do a voluntary evacuation advisory, but that's all I can authorize without do it. Please." I hung up and stood at my window, watching rain fall, watching my monitors register more movement, and feeling utterly powerless. Luna pressed against my leg, whining. She knew. I knelt down, wrapped my arms around her, and waited for the mountain to speak. It wouldn't be long now. The sound came at 4:47 a.m., not like thunder, not like wind, like the earth itself screaming. It started as a low rumble that I felt in my bones before I heard it, a bass note that seemed to resonate up through the foundation of my house. Luna bolted under the kitchen table, howling. Then came the crack. Sharp, violent, like a gunshot echoing through a canyon. Then, the roar. I was already running for my truck, grabbing my camera, my emergency radio, my field vest. The sound was deafening now, the grinding of earth breaking apart, water surging, concrete shattering, trees splintering. I drove toward Highway 74, the overlook point with a clear view of Summit Ridge. Rain hammered my windshield so hard the wipers couldn't keep up. Emergency lights already flickered in the distance. Fire trucks, police, someone else had heard it too. When I reached the overlook, I killed the engine and ran to the edge, my flashlight beam cutting through rain and darkness. The reservoir was gone. Not breached, not damaged, gone. Completely destroyed, and in its place, a massive debris flow was carving down the mountain like a living thing, a churning river of water and mud and broken concrete moving at horrifying speed, maybe 20 miles per hour, carrying everything in its path. I watched, paralyzed, as it hit the first houses on Ridgemont Drive. The sound was indescribable. The grinding, tearing, violent destruction. A car swept sideways like a toy, a deck ripped from its foundation, fences disintegrating like paper. My phone buzzed, text from Ellen, fire rescue on scene, multiple evacuations in progress. How bad? My hands shook as I typed. Complete structural failure. Debris flow approx 200 yards wide, moving 15-20 miles per hour. Unknown casualties. Then I did what I'd been trained to do. I documented. Photos, video, timestamps. Not for vindication, not for evidence. Because disasters need to be recorded so people can learn, so maybe the next one can be prevented. But as I filmed that wave of destruction, all I could think was, I warned them. I showed them the data. I did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. Then I saw movement in one of the houses being hit by the debris flow. A light in an upstairs window. Someone was still inside. I didn't think. I ran. Down the slope, slipping in mud, my flashlight bouncing wildly. Behind me, someone shouted, probably a firefighter, telling me to stay back. I didn't listen. The house was a 2-story colonial, the kind that had been built in Summit Ridge's first phase 20 years ago. The debris flow had hit the ground floor, collapsed the garage, was actively tearing apart the first floor walls. But that light in the upstairs window meant someone was trapped. I waded into knee-deep water and mud, grabbed the porch railing, which groaned, but held and screamed up at the window, "Can you get out?" A face appeared. Elderly man, maybe 70, terror in his eyes. "Window's stuck!" he shouted down. The house shuddered. Somewhere inside, something collapsed with a crash. I looked around frantically, saw a ladder lying in the yard, grabbed it, fought to extend it through the mud and water. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the mechanism. Finally got it up against the side of the house. It wasn't quite tall enough. He'd have to climb down onto the roof first, but it was better than nothing. "Climb out onto the roof," I shouted. He hesitated. The house groaned again. Now. He smashed the window with something looked like a lamp and crawled out onto the sloped roof. Started sliding immediately on the wet shingles. I climbed the ladder, reaching up, my boots slipping on every rung, grabbed his arm just as he lost his grip. For one horrible second, we both teetered on the edge of falling. His weight pulled at my shoulder socket. My feet scrambled for purchase on the ladder. Then hands grabbed my waist, a firefighter, finally caught up, and together we hauled the old man down. The three of us collapsed in the mud just as the house gave a final shudder and the entire second floor caved in. We lay there in the rain and debris, gasping, until more hands pulled us away from the wreckage. I looked back at the house now, just a pile of broken wood and shattered drywall, and thought, this is what I was trying to prevent. All of it. By dawn, the full scope of devastation was clear. 43 homes damaged, 11 completely destroyed. The elementary school's gymnasium torn from its foundation like someone had peeled it away. A 100-year-old oak tree that had been a neighborhood landmark was now a splintered wreck blocking the main road, but 0 fatalities. Mrs. Chen had kept her kids home. 12 other families had self-evacuated after the board meeting. Ellen's voluntary advisory had convinced enough people to leave that most homes were empty when the debris flow hit. And the elderly man I'd pulled from the collapsing house, Walter Henderson, retired postal worker, was shaken but alive. Still, 0 fatalities doesn't mean 0 trauma. The neighborhood I'd tried to protect was destroyed. Lives disrupted. Homes gone. A community shattered. And I felt it all like broken glass in my chest. The news crews arrived before the cleanup crews. By noon, Summit Ridge looked like a disaster movie. Emergency vehicles everywhere. Residents standing in the rain, staring at ruins. Reporters doing live shots with the scarred mountain looming behind them. Marcus Reed found me near my truck. I was downloading monitoring data, building the final record of how fast it had failed, trying to focus on documentation instead of the hollow feeling in my stomach. David, he looked as exhausted as I felt. I need you to go on record. Everything you warned about, everything they ignored, people need to know. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to retreat, go home, let others handle the aftermath. But another part, the part that had spent 15 years documenting disasters, that had fought bureaucrats in Guatemala, that knew silence-enabled tragedies, said, tell the story. So I did. Standing in the rain with the destruction behind me, I laid out the timeline for the camera. The first warnings, the soil reports, the retaliatory violations, the ignored data. The 4-3 vote to fill the reservoir despite evidence of instability. This wasn't an act of God, I said, looking directly at the camera. My voice was steadier than I expected. This was a choice. Multiple people made multiple choices to ignore warnings, to intimidate experts, to prioritize politics over safety. And this, I, gestured at the devastation, is the result. The reporter asked, do you feel vindicated? I looked at her, then at the destroyed houses behind her, then back. Vindicated? I feel like I failed. I warned them, and it wasn't enough. Being right doesn't bring back what these people lost. That quote went viral. By evening, it had 200,000 views. By morning, state officials announced a criminal investigation. But as I drove home that night, past National Guard trucks and emergency shelters and families who'd lost everything, I didn't feel like someone who'd won anything. I felt like someone who'd survived something that should never have happened in the first place, and that distinction was everything. The investigation moved faster than I'd ever seen government work, probably because every news station in North Carolina was covering the story, and politicians wanted to look decisive. Within a week, state inspectors descended on Summit Ridge. They found everything I'd documented and more. Soil samples showing clay content 40% higher than the engineering report claimed. Drainage calculations based on equipment that was never actually installed. Permits backdated after construction began. And the smoking gun, emails between Patricia Morgan and her brother-in-law's firm. Just stamp it approved. One email read, "We're on a timeline and I need this done before spring HOA elections. I can't run for county commission without a legacy project." It wasn't about water management. It wasn't about community benefit. It was about Patricia's political ambitions. She'd gambled with 200 lives to boost her campaign prospects. The state attorney general announced charges on a Wednesday morning. Criminal negligence resulting in property destruction, reckless endangerment, conspiracy to subvert permitting processes. Patricia Morgan was arrested at her home. The mugshot circulated within minutes. Expensive suit, carefully styled hair, eyes full of genuine shock. The rest of the board faced civil liability. The HOA was placed under state receivership. And me? I became the face of the story. Local engineers' warnings ignored before disaster. National news picked it up. I did 3 more interviews, appeared on a podcast about infrastructure failures, got invited to speak at conferences. People called me a hero. Walter Henderson, the man I'd pulled from the collapsing house, brought me a bottle of bourbon and couldn't stop shaking my hand. Mrs. Chin hugged me in the grocery store. James Webb called to apologize for not fighting harder. But I didn't feel like a hero. Heroes save everyone. I'd saved some people, maybe, but I couldn't save the neighborhood. Couldn't save Mrs. Rodriguez's home where she'd lived for 30 years. Couldn't save the community center where kids had learned to swim. One night, about 2 weeks after the collapse, I found graffiti on my mailbox, "Should have tried harder." I stared at it in the dark, rain falling, and thought, they're right. Sarah Kim visited a month later. We sat on my porch, not talking much, just drinking coffee and watching the valley where reconstruction had begun. Finally, she said, "You know this isn't your fault, right?" "I know. Do you? Because you look like someone carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you." I didn't answer right away. Down in the valley, they were building proper retaining walls now. Engineered drainage. Everything I'd said needed to be done from the start. I warned them. I said, eventually, had all the right data, the credentials, the evidence, and it still wasn't enough to stop it. So what good did any of it do? "David?" She turned to face me. "Mrs. Chen's kids are alive because you scared her enough to keep them home. Walter Henderson is alive because you ran into a collapsing building. 43 other families evacuated because your warnings got through to them, even if the board ignored you. If you hadn't done what you did, we'd be talking about funerals." Maybe she was right. Probably she was right. But that night I still dreamed about the sound of the collapse, the roar of water and earth. And in my dreams, the houses weren't empty. The trial was scheduled for fall. Patricia Morgan's attorney tried to get charges reduced, argued she'd relied on expert advice, couldn't be held responsible for engineering failures, had acted in good faith. The prosecutor was brutal. The defendant received multiple warnings from qualified experts. She responded with retaliation and intimidation. She pushed forward knowing permits were missing, knowing the geology was unstable, because this project was about her political career, not community safety. I was called as an expert witness. Brought my complete documentation, soil samples, monitoring data, correspondence logs, photos showing progressive deterioration, time-stamped warnings, retaliatory citations. On the stand, the prosecutor asked, "Mr. Torres, in your professional opinion, was this disaster preventable?" I looked at Patricia Morgan sitting at the defense table. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something that surprised me. Not defiance, not anger, but genuine remorse. The mask had finally cracked all the way through. She looked smaller somehow. Older. broken by the weight of what she'd done. Yes, I said quietly, completely preventable. If proper engineering protocols had been followed, if warnings had been heeded, if safety had been prioritized over ambition. And did you make those warnings clear? I did everything I could. It came out softer than I intended, but it was true. I had done everything I could. It still hadn't been enough. But it had been something. The jury deliberated for 7 hours, guilty on all counts. Patricia Morgan was sentenced to 4 years in prison, possibility of parole after 2. Other board members faced civil penalties, banned from serving on any HOA board in North Carolina for 10 years. But the real change came from the community itself. Summit Ridge, what was left of it, voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. James Webb helped draft new bylaws requiring independent engineering review for all construction projects, mandatory transparency, whistleblower protections. They called them the Torres Protocols. I asked them not to. They did it anyway. One afternoon in late summer, Mrs. Chen brought her kids to visit. They'd been living in a rental but were planning to rebuild. Her daughter, maybe 8 years old, asked, "Are you the man who saved our house?" "I didn't save it, sweetie," I said. "It was damaged. But Mommy says you're why we weren't in it when the water came." I didn't know how to respond to that. "Mrs. Chen just smiled, sad but grateful, and squeezed my shoulder. Maybe that's all you can do sometimes. Not stop the disaster, not prevent all the loss. Just make people informed enough, scared enough, to not be in the way when gravity does what it always does." By fall, the mountain was healing. The scar where the reservoir had been was terraced now, properly engineered, with drainage systems and retaining walls designed to actually hold. The neighborhood was rebuilding slower, more carefully, with proper oversight. I still walked the ridge every week, checking soil stability, monitoring moisture, documenting everything. Old habits, but also responsibility, because I knew what this mountain could do. I'd seen it, and someone needed to remember. One morning I found Luna lying in her favorite spot on the porch, not breathing. She'd passed in her sleep, peaceful, 12 years old. I buried her on the hill overlooking the valley, under the oak tree where she used to watch for squirrels. And I cried for the first time since the collapse. Not just for Luna, but for everything. The houses, the fear, the weight of being right too late, the guilt that never quite leaves. Sarah came to the funeral, just me, and her, and the wind in the trees. "She was a good dog," Sarah said. "She tried to warn me," I said. "Wouldn't go near the south pasture. Animals know." "You knew too. That's why you fought so hard." I looked down at the valley, at the rebuilt neighborhood, at the properly engineered retaining walls. "I just wish I'd fought harder." "David," Sarah's voice was gentle, "you can't save everyone. You can only tell the truth and hope enough people listen." We stood there as the sun set, turning the mountains gold and shadow. "The sound," I said eventually, "that rumble when it started, I still hear it sometimes. Wake up at 4:47 thinking it's happening again. PTSD, Sarah said. You should talk to someone. Maybe. But I knew I wouldn't. Because that sound, that memory, that 4:47 a.m. jolt of fear, that was my reminder. My alarm system. The thing that would make sure I never stopped paying attention, never stopped monitoring, never stopped listening for the next disaster that no one else wanted to believe was coming. Some people get to move on. I'd chosen to be the one who remembers. A year after the collapse, I stood at the same overlook where I'd watched the debris flow tear through Summit Ridge. The neighborhood below looked different now. Newer homes, better drainage, proper infrastructure. But you could still see the scar, the places where houses hadn't been rebuilt. The lots left empty because families couldn't afford to start over. My phone buzzed, text from Marcus Reed. State just passed new legislation. All HOA construction projects require independent geological assessment. They're calling it the Summit Ridge Safety Act. I typed back, "Good, about time." Another text, "You should feel proud. Your warnings saved lives and changed policy. Should feel proud." But pride felt like the wrong emotion for catastrophe you predicted but couldn't prevent. The sound of an engine made me turn. Ellen Rodriguez pulled up in her county vehicle. "Thought I'd find you here," she said, getting out. "Still monitoring?" "Always." She stood beside me, looking down at the valley. "You know they're building a memorial. For the collapse, they want to include your name." "I'd rather they didn't." "Why?" "You're a hero, David." "You tried to stop this." "Heroes stop disasters before they happen," I said. "I just made enough noise that some people evacuated. That's not heroism. That's just being loud enough at the right time." Ellen was quiet for a moment. Then, "Walter Henderson wants to meet you. Says he never properly thanked you for saving his life." I remembered that night, climbing the ladder in the rain, his weight pulling at my arms, the house collapsing seconds after we got clear. "Tell him he doesn't need to thank me. Tell him to, I don't know, install a sump pump, maintain his drainage, pay attention when the mountain starts making sounds it shouldn't." Ellen smiled. "I'll tell him you said hi." After she left, I sat on the hood of my truck, watching clouds build over the mountains. Rain coming. My knees told me that, and I listened. Not just to the weather, but to the sound of the earth itself. The constant, subtle symphony of stress and settlement that most people never notice. That low rumble that could be nothing. Or could be everything. My phone buzzed again. This time James Webb. "Board meeting tonight. Want you there. Discussing new construction proposal. Need your expertise." I smiled despite myself. They were learning. Finally. I typed back, "I'll be there." Because that's what I did now. The guy who showed up to board meetings and asked uncomfortable questions and pointed at plans and said, "This won't work," until people listened. Not a hero. Not a whistleblower. Not a victim. Just someone who'd learned that disasters announce themselves quietly in hairline cracks and animal behavior and the sound of machines where they shouldn't be. And someone needed to be listening. As I drove home, I passed the elementary school where Mrs. Chen's kids went. The new gymnasium was under construction, built on proper foundation, with drainage systems that would actually work. A group of kids played kickball on the field, their laughter carrying across the parking lot. That sound, children laughing, safe, unaware of how close they'd come to catastrophe that was worth all of it. The violations, the threats, the sleepless nights, the guilt. That sound was why you tell the truth, even when no one wants to hear it. I pulled into my driveway as the first raindrops started to fall. My house stood quiet, empty, without Luna, but solid. The monitoring station in my study still beeped away. Collecting data, watching the mountain, I made coffee, opened my laptop, started reviewing the construction proposal James had sent for tonight's meeting, and I listened to the rain on the roof, the wind in the trees, the constant subtle sounds of the earth settling and shifting and occasionally preparing to speak. Most people don't hear it, but I do. And I'll keep listening, because somewhere, right now, someone is building something that shouldn't be built. Someone is ignoring warnings. Someone is prioritizing ambition over safety. And when that disaster comes, not if, but when, someone needs to have been paying attention. Someone needs to have been loud enough at the right time. That someone might as well be me.